start of the invasion, just a couple weeks after the invasion, Zelensky said, all right, okay, we could think about neutrality. We should negotiate. Now, I know what happened there because I've spoken to people that were deeply involved in this. Right at the beginning, the Ukrainians said, we could really we don't have to be in NATO. We could have guarantees from other ways. And the Russians said, okay, let's talk. And the Turkish diplomats said, we'll mediate. And so real mediation started. And actually, the former prime minister of Israel, Naftali Bennett, got into the act as an informal mediator. Towards the end of March 2022, they actually were working on the draft agreement to end the war. I'm talking about more than a year ago. And the United States said no. The United States said no diplomacy. Nobody questioned that in the mainstream media here, because when's the last time you read in the New York Times a real understanding of this war? It doesn't exist in the New York Times. They just want you to follow what the U.S. government says. And so if the U.S. government says it's all Russia, they don't want to negotiate, okay, then the New York Times will say it's all Russia, they don't want to negotiate. But for those of us who are there watching, seeing, talking, it's so different. We could negotiate this till today, and we're not even trying. And we're not trying because Victoria Nuland doesn't want to try. Every time this issue of negotiation comes up, she says, no, it's not the time. And actually, when General Milley said, this is the time for negotiation, it was the Undersecretary of State that said about the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. No, he's wrong. This is not the time to negotiate. Come on, let's get serious.
Well, we have at Code Pink a campaign, Fire Victoria Nuland, which we released on International Women's Day. It's still on our website. Because we are very aware of what she is up to. Now, you touched on a lot of issues that I'd like to revisit. You mentioned the media, and we have, Ray McGovern, a former CIA analyst. He says it's not the military-industrial complex. Let's see if I can remember this. It's the military-industrial. He calls it the Mickey Mat, and included in that is the congressional complex and the media complex. We see the New York Times. We see the Washington Post constantly producing headlines that would only encourage the warmongers on the Capitol to continue funding this war in Ukraine rather than sit down and negotiate. What personally has been your experience with the New York Times and Washington Post, Jeffrey Sachs? I mean, you're a world-renowned economist. Will they talk to you?
I tried to get a piece in the New York Times recently. They actually accepted it, then they rejected it. I was trying to explain that there were provocations to this war because they have used the word unprovoked about the Russian invasion 26 times by my count. They've done it in their editorials. They've done it in the New York Times columns like Tom Friedman and others. And they've done it in the invited op-ed pieces. So I said to the editors, come on, could you run something that says that there was provocation? Just let me write a few hundred words to put it on the other side. And first the editor said, yeah, we'll accept that. I actually sent in a piece and he edited it. And then they said, no, we're not going to run this thing. So it's very hard right now to have a real discussion in the major mainstream, I'd say pro-Biden media. I think the New York Times, if it was probably against the prevailing administration, would be more critical. I don't think it's just pure dumbing down. I think it's politics. They like Biden, so they don't want to say anything against the Biden administration. And if the Biden administration is part of this war effort, they don't want to talk about it. I think that's really what it is. It's just a kind of pure partisanship, so that they feel, oh, we don't want Trump back, so we're not going to say anything bad about Biden. So, and our readers, they must think, aren't grown up enough to be able to discern any subtleties in this. It's bad, actually. It's very strange.
It is strange.
I'll tell you, my own view. This is another issue, but I'm a pretty good observer, and I talk to a lot of people. And my own view, just to shift topics for a moment, is that the U.S. blew up the Nord Stream pipeline, and I explained why I thought so from the start. Then came along Seymour Hersh, who I have to admit is a hero of mine, lifetime hero, because I grew up as a young kid reading his accounts of Vietnam War atrocities and so forth. So I've always loved Seymour, but he gave a very detailed explanation of what happened, the timing, how it was done, and so forth. The New York Times didn't even cover that, didn't even cover it to debunk it. And then there was this almost like a joke. I think it was a joke on the New York Times, actually. They got some, somebody from the CIA or someplace or the White House told them it was some people in a yacht. It was 6 people in a boat. That story lasted about 24 hours. I mean, it didn't even last 2 minutes in my view. I thought it was hilarious, not substantive. But the New York Times ran it with a straight face, but they wouldn't run Seymour Hersh's account and then discuss it. So they're not even covering the news and much less challenging a critical thought. And
yes, I would
that's
agree.
Pretty serious.
The New York Times, the Washington Post, and their coverage of what's happening in Ukraine have really assigned themselves to irrelevancy because they are Pentagon PR flacks who just repeat talking points. And there's no serious investigation into any aspect of this war. And that's why, at Code Pink, we support alternative, non-corporate journalism. Please tell others. Code Pink Radio will tell you the truth. Now, Jeffrey Sachs, let's talk about China a little bit further. Yeah. China has come out with the 12-point peace proposal, which Biden immediately dismissed as, what did he say? He said it was irrational. Frankly, his response was irrational. Meanwhile, we've had actual Code Pink members have met with representatives of China in Washington, D.C. to thank the Chinese government for coming up with this peace plan and for playing a peacemaker's role. I mean, whatever people think about China and whatever criticisms they have, I think we have to be very clear that China, as you mentioned, has maybe 1 or 2 overseas bases. It's not a threat militarily, and it is trying to play the role of peacemaker, not just in the Middle East, but also in Ukraine. Do you think that China, the global South, can make a difference here? I mean, because it's not just China, it's Mexico, it's Brazil, it's other countries too that are saying we need a ceasefire. We need it now because they know the security of not just Ukraine and Russia and the United States is at stake, but the security of the entire globe.
First, I think people should understand a basic fact about China. China has not engaged in one overseas war in the last 40 years, while the United States has been engaged in non-stop wars. We keep pointing our finger at China. Look at how militaristic. We vastly outspend China on the military. We have surrounded China with military bases. We've been engaged in constant wars. We are trying right now to break the Chinese economy. And then we point our finger like the G7 did in this recent meeting in just a kind of a hate-filled, ignorant session. Look at how evil China is. Look at how evil China is. It's so low level for anyone who really follows this. I was actually myself in China last month. I've been to China so many times over the last 40 years. We're in a propaganda field right now of anti-China propaganda that has no basis in reality. And we're trying to create an enemy there so we can crush China because they're daring to achieve economic development. So this is the starting point. Now, in terms of China's peace plan, it has one crucial point, and it says that a peace agreement should respect the security interests of all parties. What does that mean? That's code for don't expand NATO, because Russia, understandably, regards that as a direct security threat. To have NATO weapons on Russia's 1,900-kilometer border with Ukraine is not what Russia would like. Just like we would not be thrilled with Russian bases in Mexico or in Canada or any place else nearby. That's what Russia's trying to tell us. China gets it. China just uses very Confucian, if I could say, very nice, orderly words, respect the security interests of all parties. And that means to the United States, would you understand what Russia has been saying to the US since Russia was independent December 1991? Don't enlarge NATO. And especially since 2008. My God, not to Georgia. Are you kidding? That's what they've been telling us. And China gets it. And that's why Biden immediately rejected it. Because this is a game. The game is Newland's game to expand NATO to Ukraine.